there's two sides of the pendulum that the world pushes. And sometimes Christians have swung to, right? Mm-hmm. And we need to really be looking for kind of the middle path, the one that is balanced and ultimately takes into consideration what God's view on this thing was, right? And so you kind of called that like, let's be mature followers of Christ, where we really understand what his purpose and calling for us is in this particular realm. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Salty Pastor Podcast. The entire point of this podcast is to help you grow in your faith. When you grow in your faith, everything else in your life comes into focus. When you grow in your faith, many of the problems you have simply go away or resolve themselves. But in order to grow your faith, you have to realize it takes work. Fluff is not enough. You need to start thinking for yourself, and our goal is to give you the tools to do just that. So welcome to the Salty Pastor Podcast, a place where you can grow. My name is Jesse Mayer. I'll be your host, but we cannot do this without the one, the only, the Salty Pastor himself, Dr. Douglas Peak.
Welcome, everybody. I am excited to be with you, and welcome the Salty crew to our challenging topic. This series, we're talking about intimacy and sex. And so this is your warning ahead of time. If you don't want to be explaining things to your children, if they listen with you, you might want to just be cognizant of that. And very excited about the website. It's up and running. Go over there and check it out. It's thesaltypastor, all one word.com. And if you also help us out, go to our YouTube channel. And right there, you can like and subscribe. And the subscription base has been growing and growing. And so pretty excited about that. And we want to keep it moving forward. So welcome to this ministry. Welcome to what we're doing. And we hope more than anything else, it helps you grow in your faith.
Absolutely. And we are in the midst of our series on intimacy and sexuality called Exposed, the Intimacy Illusion. The first major principle you pointed out in this series was we can't understand our sex drive apart from our spiritual nature. And this week we've been digging into a large number of passages in the Bible that deal with human sexuality directly. Now, for today's discussion, here's kind of my question, Pastor. It seems that there's a large body of biblical passages that address our sexuality as human beings.
Yes.
We live in a society that is constantly attacking what these passages teach about human nature and our sexuality. So my question is, how should we deal with this pressure?
Well, thoughtfully, I hope. Well, one of the greatest things about Christianity that I love is that there's 2,000 years of people dealing with stuff, right? And no matter what issue you may be facing, I can almost 100% guarantee you that someone in the past has dealt with it and written about it in some form or another. And that's the beauty about, just opening your mind and trying to expand your horizons a little bit. We tend to be so focused on the here and now and focused only pragmatically that can help me through the next 5 minutes. But there's just a wealth of literature, just a wealth of people who have come before us and written about their experience with Christ and following him in their society and their culture. And so when you go back and you look at the first century biblical passages, just right from the New Testament and what they wrote about, and then you read about other Roman historians talking about what was going on kind of in the sexual arena. Then you go into that second century and third century, you can read the early church fathers and what they thought about all of the sexual practices of the Roman Empire and the values that they had and their perspective of children and family. You can read about that. You can go into the 4th and 5th century. You can just keep going and read about all of these different approaches to human sexuality. And when you go back and you read through this literature of 2,000 years, what you come up with, I basically come up with, there's basically 3 responses to human sexuality. And the first one came out very early, and it was basically run from all desires, period, most importantly, sexual ones. And they called this asceticism, right? And very early on, you had the desert fathers, and you had other people that would go and they would take vows of celibacy and vows of poverty and vows of all these things because they were trying to, the term was mortify the flesh. In other words, they took Paul's writing about you got to take off the old self and put on the new self, and they interpreted that to mean a little bit, the Gnostic influence came in here as, well, the new self is pure spiritual and the old self is pure flesh. And if you think of it in those terms, then you will definitely get the idea that all flesh is evil and all spirit is good. But when you really understand what Paul was saying, Paul wasn't really necessarily dealing with Gnostic philosophy. He was dealing primarily with Judaism and its philosophy. And so I think that's really important to understand, is that he was talking about how almost the exact opposite than a Gnostic would interpret his words, and that is you can't separate your daily behavior from its influence on your soul, right?
Right.
So how you live and your daily morality impacts your heart, and your heart impacts your daily living. You need to bring those two in alignment.
Right.
Okay. And so what happened is later on, 150 years later, 200 years later, so you had the ascetics come up, and they kind of reinterpreted it a little bit and said, well, you need to run. Not just sexual immorality is wrong, all sex is wrong, right? Okay. You got to take a vow of celibacy.
Right.
Now, the second approach that was really popular, and this started coming up in the 4th century, and it was called the deathbed conversion philosophy. And that was basically, well, I believe in Jesus, I really like Jesus, but I'm going to live my life as a heathen and doing what I want, and then right before I die, I'm going to get baptized.
Okay.
Right? So that...
Just the last minute cash in,
it's
basically.
a last minute cash in, baby. So that my sins can't be held against me, which is kind of a misunderstanding of the whole gospel in the first place. I ran into this in Jamaica. When we were doing missions work down in Jamaica, we basically, the way the culture in Jamaica works, and this was in Kingston, and I'd been there, 4 or 5 times,
okay,
and got to know the pastor there. He was a native of Jamaica, and it was really interesting. He basically said, well, what the culture does predominantly among the middle class and the upper class is that they'll go to a church, but they won't join the church. Right?
Okay.
And the reason they do that is because they go out, they find a woman, or the woman finds a man, they'll cohabitate, they'll even have kids together, but they'll never get married, right? And then what they do is then they break up and find other partners, and because they believe that it's not possible in their culture to have a long-term monogamous relationships. And so what's happened is in his ministry, he had 4 or 5 different churches that had raised entire generations of children in the church with the new religious ethic. And so on one of the trips there, they went to a wedding, and it was a young couple that got married.
Okay.
And he said this is so out of the ordinary because normally what they do is they don't join the church and they don't get married until the end of their life, right? So that they're not held to a higher moral standard, which is kind of interesting because they hold to the higher moral standard. They just don't want to be held to living up to it. So they wait until they're much older, and then they become members of their church, and then they'll get married, which is really quite fascinating to me, is that, well, that's the opposite of the intent of what it was. These things are supposed to bring a better life, not a restricted life,
right,
to you. So this called and a lot of people live this way today. I think a lot of young people live this way today. It's like, well, I'm a Christian but I'm going to go, live with people, and I'm going to have sex with whoever I want. I'm going to do whatever I want, and I'll get my act together later when I'm ready to settle down and get serious. The third approach that has happened out there is very rare, in my opinion, and that is it's grow up and act like a mature follower of Jesus, for crying out loud. Quit walking around like a baby and an infant, and like the writer of Hebrews says, by now you should be a meat eater, but you're a milk drinker. You have to have someone explain the elementary principles of the gospel of Christ to you all over again. For crying out loud, just grow up. You know, I know that's salty to say, but you need to go out and seek to understand what is the point of knowing Jesus and following him. What is the point of knowing and embracing what he's trying to do in your life and in your heart? And if you want to understand that, you can't look at sex and sexuality and say, oh, it's so bad, I'm not going to worry about it, and I'm going to run from it. It's all bad. It's terrible. I'm never going to, you have this legalistic attitude towards it, right? And you're denying all of these things inside of yourself. Well, how does that work? It often doesn't work well, because one of two things happen. The first one is that people get up, and when there's no cultural restraint around them, like they go off to college or something, they just go off the deep end, right?
Well, I was going to say, I think as a millennial, we saw this in the purity movement, right?
Yeah.
Like this idea of like basically this asceticism of like, don't ever even think about it, run away from it. And it wasn't just trying to teach like wait till marriage. It was basically, if you even have a thought, then you're instantly
damaged goods for your whole life.
And it creates this whole fear of the whole situation. So then you either swing the other way or you live in fear of it. And then
after you get married.
Yeah. Like I've heard stories of people like, I don't even know what I'm supposed to be doing, because now I'm having trouble reconciling this thing I've been afraid of my entire life because I was told it was bad.
It's the worst thing
and
ever.
Now I'm supposed to just pivot and everything's fine. I guess so you're missing that fact that it's like, oh no, this is an innate desire. You just need to have your control over it. And it's set up to be a very specific thing in a specific area, because that's what's best for you and best for your relationship. Not because it's like it's not hellfire brimstone. And that's how the purity movement kind of cast it is, and how we see in the asceticism of like everything about it's bad, and then you have to suddenly flip a switch and
when you really
like
dig in, see, that's a great point, because when you really dig into it, what you're trying to ask yourself is this basic question, and that is, I'd like to do the right thing so I get the best benefit. Right? I want to do the right thing. And so what we do is say, okay, well, what are we going to rely on to inspire you, empower you, motivate you to do the right thing? The struggle I had with the purity movement is that, well, we're going to scare you to death.
Right.
So what are you relying on to motivate you to do the right thing? Fear. Does fear ever work?
No, especially when you see other people doing things and nothing bad is happening to them.
There's no lightning.
Like, that's why, I mean, that's kind of the idea of the purity movement. It was like, all these things are going to be wrong. And it's like, but you see all these people out making different choices, and you go, well, they're not living in fear. They're not dealing with any of this stuff.
And so what does that do? Is that pushes people into the susceptibility of influence from the world.
Right.
See, what I think is the third option is the most important, because let me ask you some questions. Like, for instance, how do you, as a young man, not you, Jesse, in particular, but let's say young single men, right? At college. How do you young men deal with the powerful drive inside of you? Well, based on the three options I gave before, is you can try and deny it and suppress it and run from it and be afraid of it at all cost. And I guarantee you that in my experience, what I've seen is young men who have incredibly strong willpower can do that. Men who don't have strong willpower can't. And what they usually do is they draw it. It goes underground and quietly, right? It presents itself in pornography or masturbation or these other things, right? So that's what happens in the run from it. Is you're so afraid of it, or you're afraid of other people knowing about it. And what happens is when you're doing something in secret, and you're afraid that somebody outside is going to find out about it, what has happened is Satan has now got you trapped in shame.
Right.
And I've said this before, it's controversial, and that is, if you're a young man and you have a problem with lust, I'm not that concerned about that. Because lust is very easy to fix. It just requires repentance. I'm going to turn away from that and turn to something else. And as long as I'm turning to something that's positive, filling my life with good things, guess what? It becomes a non-issue. People go, well, then why is it so hard, Pastor, to break free from sexual addictions and sexual sin and stuff like that? I said, well, it's not because the actual thing itself, right? it's because of all the shame that has been associated with it. And getting over shame and getting over guilt is one of the most difficult things you'll ever do.
Well, and what I see too is the idea of like that shame and guilt then decreases your self-worth and value, which then, especially if it's like a pornography addiction or something, can lead you going back to it because it's like, well, this is the only way I feel any better about myself.
Right.
And then it gets cyclical,
exactly.
right?
And so you have no willpower to stop.
Right.
And so you're caught in the trap. So I don't think denying it and suppressing it is your best option. The other option then is, then I'm just going to do whatever I want, thinking I'm going to get my act together later. I'm just going to ask for forgiveness when I'm 25, and what I'm going to be is I'm going to become celibate, when I'm 25 and I'm ready to get married.
Then I'll be a proper person, right?
Yeah. Well, that didn't work. That didn't work at all, because everything you do prior to your marriage has an influence on your marriage, whether you want it to or not.
Yep.
Right? Absolutely 100%. Or what you could do, young men, is develop a healthy and biblical perspective of your sexuality that enhances and encompasses the thirst for your soul. And what that does is that teaches you to recognize how the world tries to use your sex drive to tempt you, manipulate you, and coerce you into decisions that ultimately end up harming you. Well, that's a whole different ballgame, right? When you're mature, that's what the goal is. Well, same question, young ladies, if you're a young single woman, how do you develop a view of intimacy and sexuality that meets your deepest needs of your soul? Well, you can run from it, be fearful of it, no matter what, say this, I'm going to stay away from it, and I'm not going to let any guy, that's ever done that or in the past have anything to do with me. I won't date those guys. They have to be at least 6 feet tall. They have to have a certain salary. They have to be educated, and they have to be, virgins. Right. But the problem is that when that is the defining factor, fear, then what happens is in your marital relationship, how does that affect you? If you spent so much time before getting married seeing sex as bad, then when you get married, what happens?
You just can't even process it, right?
Yeah, and one of the things that I've seen many times in counseling is that women who have done this use sex to manipulate in their marriages. And this becomes a really, really big problem. The other option, young ladies, is you can just say, well, I'm not going to worry about it. I'll settle down later. Just like the other guys, I'll become a new virgin when I'm ready to get married. And so, well, does that work? I don't think so. Or young ladies, what you could do? You can grow up, try to be a mature follower of Jesus, and you can say, I want to embrace every good thing that God has for me. I want a healthy view of this. I understand that it's wonderful for creating life and having a baby and having family, but God also created it between me and my husband for enjoyment and pleasure to build a bond that's unbreakable between us. And I don't want to use it to manipulate, coerce, or control my spouse. I need to see it as a wonderful, beautiful dance that we do together. And God has designed it that way. If you doubt that, just go read the book Song of Solomon, right? And it'll tell you a whole lot of different perspective than the one I just described. So I think it's just really important to say we need to stop using these old approaches to our sexual drive and try to get to the real in-depth thing that God is doing in our souls, and that allows us to recognize how Satan wants to tempt us with it to coerce us and manipulate us. The most important thing that we can do as mature followers of Christ is to watch for, as it says in Ephesians chapter 6, the devil's schemes and how he's trying to capture us with deceptive philosophy, Paul says, in Colossians, in the traditions of men. We want to get past that and to try to have full maturity of every good thing that we have in Jesus.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I feel like we're having a really good conversation about there's two sides of the pendulum that the world pushes, and sometimes Christians have swung to, right? Mm-hmm. And we need to really be looking for kind of the middle path, the one that is balanced and ultimately takes into consideration what God's view on this thing was, right? And so you kind of called that like, let's be mature followers of Christ, where we really understand what his purpose and calling for us is in this particular realm. So talk to me a little bit about what I should be thinking about, major considerations as I want to grow up and mature in this particular area.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, they say, well, there's a kind of a right path or there's a left path and then there's the middle path. I would change the metaphor to say that there is a wide path over here, there's a wide path over there, and there's only one narrow path, and it's the higher path.
Right.
Right. And it's hard to find. Jesus said, this ain't easy.
Right.
It's pretty narrow, and not a lot of people figure it out.
Right.
And, I'm challenging everybody listening. You can figure it out if you want to. You knock, the door will be open. Seek, you will find. You have to understand, I think, that the most important considerations is that you have a drive and desire within you. It is a God-given desire. But like every other gift in your life, you need to treat that desire with the respect it deserves. You already live this way. Eating and enjoying really good food is a gift from God. Just think if we didn't have taste buds.
We don't technically have to have them, right? Like,
correct.
It's a gift because theoretically we could take nutrition. I mean, we do this when we're in the hospital, right? They just like pump nutrition into you if you're unable to eat. So it's like God could have designed us to take in nutrition in a completely
benign
way.
Yeah. Just a benign mechanical way, and over time we would have learned, eat this, you do better. Don't eat that, you die. Right. But no, we have these taste buds, and oh boy, you can there's some things that you eat that you go, oh, that's pure ecstasy, right? It's just wonderful. Eating is a gift, but you have to treat it with respect, right? Sleeping, rest, decompressing is a gift. Man, sometimes the best thing to do is to lay down in bed at night and go to sleep, right? Or sometimes when you take a vacation where you can just totally turn the phone and everything off and decompress, right? Isn't that a wonderful gift? But guess what? Treat it with respect. Because if that's all you live for, what do you end up doing? Becoming a lazy,
slothfulness,
a slothful person. Right. Yeah. Working, the opposite of this, being ambitious, productive, accomplishing things, making a splash in the world is a wonderful gift, but you got to treat it with respect, because what happens if you work so much, you become a workaholic.
You turn into me.
Making money, investing, growing your prosperity is a wonderful gift, but you treat it with respect, right? Life in general is a gift. Just the fact that you're alive, it's a gift, but treat your life with respect. So the best way to do that is to realize that there are people, there are influences in this world that don't want me to treat things with respect. Take money, for instance. There are people who don't want me to treat making money with respect because they want to separate me from my money.
Credit card companies.
Yeah. They come in and they say, hey, you could double your money on this penny stock. Right. Well, if I don't respect the hard work it takes to make money, guess what? Oh, yeah, I'll roll the dice at Vegas to try to double my money. We can be manipulated, right?
Right.
Well, in the same way, there are people who don't want you to treat your sex drive and your sexual desires with respect, because they want to take advantage of you and take advantage of that sex drive. Why do you think, guys, they always put girls in bikinis on beer commercials and car commercials?
They're tapping into something.
They're trying to manipulate you. Yep. And guess what? They keep doing it. So that tells you
it's working.
It's working. Do you think people who produce and distribute pornography do what they're doing because they value sexuality and sexual fulfillment? Is that why? Do they want to increase the knowledge of sexuality, or do they do it to make money? Money. It's all about the money. So, if you know this to be true in every other area of your life, you also have to realize that not only are, Fifth Avenue and beer companies, wanting to manipulate you, credit card companies that want to manipulate you, pornographers want to manipulate you. Why do you think pornographers spend all their time trying to get pornography in front of middle school boys? Because
Gotta hook them early.
If you get them hooked early, it becomes a lifelong habit and problem, right? And so that's why they're doing that. It's also important to realize that there are those who want to use sexuality to actually destabilize society. One of the most important things to consider is that the goal of those wanting to influence society and turn it in a certain direction want to do it by creating sexual confusion. The more confused we are about sexual desire, sexual drive, sexual fulfillment, the more destabilized our society becomes, right? And the more individuals are hurt, wounded, disappointed when they adopt these values that these groups of people are pushing because they don't work and they are incongruent. There's actually been a lot of research done on the fall of nations and empires, according to Camille Paglia and Douglas Murray. Camille Paglia is a thought leader. Douglas Murray is a historian from the UK. And this is what I find so fascinating. Both of them are gay. They've lived their entire lives gay, right? And both of them have done a lot of research. Paglia has written some books. Douglas Murray has published research that says the final stage of the collapse of an empire is when the society becomes obsessed with gender identity and androgyny. Isn't that interesting? Androgyny is what?
We're all the same.
There is no difference between males and females.
Right.
It's really fascinating because this was actually addressed in the book of 1 Corinthians. And because there in Corinth, there was a fertility cult there, right? And for people who served in the temples, the fertility cults there, you could be a male or a female. It didn't matter. But the temple garb, they would shave their heads, and then you would wear like a see-through light linen garment, so that you didn't know if you were with a female or a male during the sex act in the temple worship. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
It's an androgynous approach. So I think it's really important. If you're trying to figure out how to pursue intimacy in your life, let's be real practical here, and you know that your sex drive is a major part of the pursuit of intimacy in your life, why in the world would you allow a society hell-bent on destruction to influence your core values about sexuality? How can you trust a society and what it says about your nature? And that's what's really important.
Yeah, I mean, I think we really need to be thinking about who really has our best interests at heart and who's using our desires and our base needs and wants and things of this nature to manipulate us, right? Or are we actually pursuing something that's actually going to benefit us in the long run, right? And if we look at where the world seems to be leading us through the influences of Satan, it seems like they don't have the best interests in heart for us.
Right.
And they're utilizing our desires and what God gave us to manipulate us into doing things that are not for our benefit, right?
Yep.
And so talk to me about how realistic do you think it is that there's, how can
Is there any way to not be influenced by this?
How can we stop this influence? Like, realistically, is it like we just shut off all media forever and we just run away? Do we just lock ourselves away into a temple?
The Desert Fathers did that. They went out into the desert for 20 or 30 years and lived in a cave.
Right.
I'm like, well, how'd that turn out?
Right.
I don't know. I'll tell you a little story that, to me, it's a heartbreaking story, but I knew a young man. And I knew this man I'd met him the first time when he was a boy. He was fourth or fifth grade when I first met him. And this is one of the benefits of living in the same town, being at the same church for almost 30 years. And what happened is when he was in middle school, he was exposed to pornography. And what's interesting is that the pornography he was exposed to was gay porn, all right, males. And of course, pornography is designed to do one thing, and that is to excite you, right? Very similar to alcohol, to either legal or illegal drugs, marijuana, all drugs, all chemicals. They provoke a chemical response within your body that results in a change of your emotional state, right?
Right.
You can, some things like cocaine or meth or all of these things, they make you heightened and uppers. Marijuana does what? It makes you
Calm.
calms. It just, poofs you out. And what's interesting is pornography, the way it's filmed and presented, does the exact same thing. It's designed to excite various chemical regions of the brain to produce certain chemical reactions.
Right.
And in his mind, he got most turned on, most excited when he watched gay porn. And according to his testimony, he was kind of a frail kid. He was not athletic. He wasn't super creative either. He wasn't like in the band or the arts or guitar player or anything. And so he didn't fit in with the jocks or these other groups at school. So he came to the conclusion that he was gay, even though he had never had a relationship with a gay person. So he goes off to college, according to his testimony, and he joins these gay clubs, right? And basically, he, like all these groups do, is they gave him a sense of community and camaraderie. And a lot of what they did, he said, is they had this, well, you're gay and everybody hates you and nobody wants to accept you. So they were basically using a technical approach that cults use. Do you know why you never fit in? Do you know why you never? That's because you were meant to be a part of us. And that's how cults do it. That's how they recruit. And so he was recruited into this. And what's really interesting is he realized that there was only one price of admission to the club, and that is you had to go out and have sex with other men. And so he went out and he eventually broke down and participated in gay sex. Okay. Stuff that he'd seen for thousands and thousands of times, right? That he'd watched. Well, guess what happened? He said, according to his testimony, it made him so sick, he started throwing up. Okay. And this is when his drug addiction started. To be a part of the group, he had to keep having sex with other males. But the problem is every time he did it, he got so sick, so he started taking drugs to medicate. Okay, to me, this is a perfect example, and I'm not trying to say that all people who have, orientations towards homosexuality came to it in this way. I'm not trying to make all these broad statements about it. I'm just simply saying, in this case, I have a exact case study of a person, firsthand knowledge of how it happened to them. And so it's a real experience. And so regardless of what you think about it, you're going to have to take into account his experience as real and truthful. And he has just lived now as an adult, completely tortured, constantly dealing with drug addiction. He left the gay lifestyle, right? But he's still completely adrift. And he says that today. He's trying to find his way. So what do we mean by this? If you're a young man or young woman, you're going to deal with attraction. And at every level of your physiology, right? When you start having sexual attractions and attractions towards other people, they're going to dominate you, right?
Right.
The question you need to have is this: if you grew up in a culture that is a really warped understanding of sex and sexuality, then how does that influence the attractions you feel? Is it a possibility? All right. Should you consider it a possibility that there are forces that are attempting to manipulate you through your sex drive? And they are attempting to fan the flames of a natural desire so that you seek to fulfill it in a way other than what is best for you and for those around you.
Absolutely. Those are things to consider, and we need to be thinking for ourselves and thinking through that, because that's going to help us make the best decisions we can make for ourselves. Thank you, Pastor, so much for leading this discussion today. I think this was a really good topic to really dive into and really start diving deep on, because it's all around us and we have to understand what it's doing and how it's influencing the people in our lives. It influences us and what we can do about it and what the real solution is. So thank you for leading that discussion. Thank you so much, listeners, for joining us today. Make sure you check out thesaltypastor.com to see more information. Check out that database that was so kindly put together so you can find old episodes and what they might be covering. And then until next time, we'll see you here on the Salty Pastor Podcast.
Keep thinking for yourself.